Hey guys, Ben from bachphotography here, and today we are looking at a wedding that I did in England, in particular a shot I did straight after the ceremony of the bride and groom coming out to the audience. And this video will be about the gear I used and also the editing I did in the photo afterwards. So the bride and groom walking down the aisle after the ceremony I think is one of the most important photos for you to get during the wedding day, and I think that if you can, it's a very important shot to take because it's really the first moment the couple have together being husband and wife. Not only that, you often get some really nice emotion from the bride and groom, but also the family members around, so everyone's smiling, everyone's happy. You often have a bit of time before to get into place as well, and it's just a fantastic photo in general. You know, you've got the leading lines of the people in the background, you've got the two subjects in the middle at the front, and then you've got the beautiful background which sort of sets a picture of what's going on in the photo as well. So the equipment I used for this particular photo was a Sony a7R II coupled with a Sigma MC11 adapter so I could use Canon glass on my Sony camera, and a Tamron 24-70 f2.8 lens. And the settings on the camera were f3.2, 1/400th of a second, and ISO 250. So the reason I shot at an aperture of f3.2 is actually a mistake. I meant to shoot it at 2.8, but the aperture wheel on my a7R II is a little small, so sometimes I accidentally nudge it and set it to 3.2. The shutter speed was 1/400th of a second. It's a nice quick shutter speed, so there's no motion blur, and because it was outside nice and bright, I could boost the shutter speed up a little bit and get everything nice and crisp. And the ISO was 250 because it was daytime, it was outside. I could use a nice low ISO to get a clean, crisp signal without much noise going into the sensor. So there's a few things to think about when you're about to shoot the bride and groom coming down the aisle, particularly if they're going to have confetti thrown on them. The first thing to think about is having your camera on continuous shooting mode so you can burst heaps of frames off. When you're taking 30 or 40 shots very quickly, there's a very high chance that you're going to get a couple of frames where all the confetti is blown out in all the right places. They're both looking at you or looking at each other, smiling and happy. If you're only going to take one or two photos, you might miss that critical moment where all the confetti is flying around them, and there's always the perfect split second where everything has aligned, and if you're only taking a couple photos you might miss it, so it's a good idea to just burst off 20 or 30 shots and then go through them later and pick out one or two that are the best. So this is the photo we'll be looking at in this video. It's actually two photos put together, but we'll get back to that later. For now, let's jump into Photoshop and we'll start the editing process. So the first thing I did was up the exposure on the entire image, just because I thought the exposure was a little bit low and I wanted the image to be really bright and punchy. So not only did I up the exposure, I put some clarity on the entire image as well, just to separate things from the foreground and background. Next thing I did was up the vibrance in the entire image because I wanted the image to be really colourful and happy, but I thought that his suit was getting a little bit too blue because he's the groom, so he shouldn't be wearing a bright blue jacket, and he wasn't anyway, so I thought I would just change that back to being a little bit less blue, a little bit truer to what the colour was in the scene originally. Then I changed with a few more colours, up the green so the flowers looked really bold and bright. Then I added some reds just because of the lady in the background. I thought her jacket and hat were really awesome, so I upped the reds on there as well as boosting the magentas a little bit as well, because there were some really nice magenta flowers in her bouquet. So that's pretty much everything I did with the colours. Next thing I did was I got the brush tool, and basically what I'm doing here is just resetting all of the sliders and then changing the color balance on the brush tool to a bit more yellow and then upping the exposure. And basically what I was doing, because it was such a cloudy day, the light was very flat in the entire scene, so I'm just adding a little bit of golden light to emulate a low-hanging sun and on a bright and sunny day, just to make the image look a little bit more bright and happy and punchy. Because it was such an overcast day, the image was really quite grey and drab, so I thought that adding a sunny style colour to the top of the image really did make the entire thing look a bit more bright and warm and happy. So the next thing I did was I noticed a bit of confetti on the groom's suit, and that was really bothering me, so I just removed those little bits. Unfortunately I didn't get a awesome shot of all the confetti flying on them, which I was a bit disappointed about, but this shot's still quite nice. They both look very happy, so not all is lost. Next thing I did was just touched up some of the skin on the groom's face. I didn't touch any of the skin on the bride's face because I'm actually going to swap her face for a more flattering looking one in a minute. Next thing I did was sharpen the groom's eyes up as well, just to make them more of a focus in the image. And then just made a selection around the bride and groom so that I can blur out the background, because as you can see there's just a lady there in the background with a point and shoot camera and she's a little bit distracting. So I thought I'd just, instead of spending a lot of time cutting her out, just make the whole scene a little bit more blurry just to get her out of the frame a little bit and make them more the focus of the image. So made a selection, then I went invert the selection, adding a Gaussian blur 1.5 pixels, and then just moving that selection, adding another Gaussian blur, moving the selection, and then adding another Gaussian blur. So the reason I'm moving the selection is so we don't have a hard line where the blur starts and finishes. Just makes the entire image transition better and look smoother. So after that I thought, well, her face isn't in the most flattering position. I think we can probably find a better head where she's looking a little bit nicer, a little bit more flattering, and then we can replace her head with the head from a different photo. Okay, so here is another image, and I've pretty much edited it the same way, so I won't go through that process again. Just reduce the vibrance a little bit there just to make the head in that photo about the same color as the head in this photo. So the first thing I did with this photo was just get the lasso tool and make a little selection around the bride's head. Then Control C, move over to the other image, and Control V, and there's the head. So first thing I did was just align it, so trying to get the neck and the neck of the other photo to line up. It's not going to look like it's going to be perfect, so what I actually end up having to do is just tilting it slightly just to get the neck lined up perfect there. So once the neck is lined up perfect, the next thing to do is just apply that transformation and then get the eraser tool and start making some erasers. Start erasing some of the background there that we don't want in the shot. So basically the idea is we just want to get the least amount of background in there and try to just isolate the bride's face so that it doesn't look strange overlapping her face with an extra face. So I'm just going to fast forward all of this part of the video just because it's a little bit boring, and we'll come back when I've deleted most of the excess image. So there she is with a new head. I don't always spend this much time on every single photo for a wedding, but I think when you're getting the best of the best photos, the really important shots, it's very nice for the couple if you spend a little bit extra time getting some really heavily edited photos. And the last thing I did with this one was just added a little bit of exposure and clarity to her eyes, just to make them pop, because I think that with portraits, or any photography really with people in it, the eyes are what people get drawn to when they're looking at an image, so it's important that they stand out and they're the subject of the image. So that's the last thing I did. Thank you for watching this tutorial. Here's the final image. I really hope that you enjoyed it and learned something. Please leave a like if you did enjoy the video, and feel free to subscribe as well. I'm going to be producing a lot more content like this in the future. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.